Hi everyone, it's Kim at Good Vibe Astrology, and I'm here today to talk to you about the transits of the moon. This is part of our ongoing Transform with Transits course, and it will support the kinds of dialogues we're going to have on the calls and in the forums as we look at the moon, the fastest moving planet we have out there in our astrological solar system. Now notice in astrology we call the sun and moon planets when we're referring to them as transits. They're also known as the luminaries, where the sun is the greater light and the greater luminary, and the moon is the lesser light or lesser luminary. Notice that where the sun is represented by the circle with a dot in it, which is the whole and complete self, the moon is represented by the crescent, which is half a circle, and it represents the personality, where in this night sky, this moon's light comes from the sun. It's a reflection of the solar light. And that is a metaphor for how the personality is ideally, in the perfect world, a reflection of the totality of self, the whole and complete self. So the moon is our fastest moving planet through the zodiac, and it goes through phases as it transits in 28 days through the entire 360 degrees of the zodiac belt. That means that the moon is going to transit your chart once a month, 13 times a year. Here is a representation of the phases of the moon. Now, how we see the moon is going to be in its relationship to the sun, where it starts out as a new moon. It's conjunct the sun. By the time it gets up to full moon, it's in opposition, and then it wanes back down to the dark moon and new moon again. We can see this in eclipse as the phases of the moon are dependent on its relationship to the ecliptic and the position of the sun. In practical terms, in our astrological chart, the moon is going to spend about 2.5 days in each house, depending on how large or small your various houses are. You can plot it around there, and of course realize that the moon is going to conjunct, oppose, and aspect every single thing in the chart every month. So one way of understanding the transits is to know that the longer they last, the longer the transit is within orb of that house or the planet that it's conjuncting or aspecting, usually the more it coincides with a major inner or outer event. So because we have the lunar transits every month, 13 times a year, astrologically, we don't see them as being a huge big deal, except they are. They are in a couple of ways. Number one way is the moon very often acts as a trigger. You will hear this term trigger. And it means that if you've had, let's say you've had Saturn conjunct your sun for so long, you can't remember life before you got Saturn conjunct the sun, so it's been going on for like a year. And you're not going to live that transit out in this powerful level of constant intensity. It's going to ebb and flow. One of those flow moments are going to be when the moon comes around and conjuncts it and adds itself, triggers that long-term transit. There's another instance where the moon becomes a very powerful indicator transit-wise, and that's when it forms an eclipse, either a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse. When the sun, moon, and north and south lunar nodes line up, that means they're lining up on the same ecliptic plane. You can see that demonstrated here, where we have the moon, the sun, and the ecliptic plane all in a row. In this case, it's the opposition, so it's a full moon eclipse, a lunar eclipse. What we have is the earth blocking the light of the sun, and the moon darkens. When the moon is over here on the same side as the sun, it lines up and blocks the light of the sun from the earth, and we have a solar eclipse. Okay, so on a basic level, we can look at each house being highlighted through the month. When the moon is in the first house, it's a good time to go through your wardrobe and think about your appearance. It might be a great time to, put that color in your hair or change something about the way you look. Where the moon is by transit, where the moon is in the chart. Life fluctuates. We use the phases of the moon to support us in things like planting. We always want to put seeds in the ground when the moon is increasing in light, particularly in a water sign. If you want to cut your hair for growth, you're going to do it when the moon is, again, in a water sign and increasing in light. If you want to cut it so that it stays short, if you don't want to have to keep cutting it all the time, you want it to stay put, cut it in perhaps the sign of Capricorn and do it when the moon is waning. So other things that the moon represents besides the personality is the unconscious. It's very much about the feelings and receptivity. It represents the mother and mothering. It represents the sacred feminine. Memory belongs to the moon, where Mercury rules the mind. The moon's a lot about habit patterns. The moon also represents the functional power of the body, so it has a lot to do with our health. It represents the stomach and the breasts in the physical body. Of course, it rules the sign of Cancer, and it's the natural ruler of the 4th house. We can look for support, energetic support, as to where the moon is transiting, even though it's going to go through the entire zodiac, goes right around our chart every month, 13 times a year. We are still going to be able to tune in to where the moon is in our chart, particularly when it acts as a trigger to a long-term transit. It works like a super lunar transit, like a very powerful long-term transit are the eclipses, and you're going to want to watch where they occur by house and if they are conjunct or opposite or pulling in, possibly by square or even trine, any other planets in the chart. I like to use big orbs with eclipses because they work. They work. So I would allow 10 degrees. Some people go up to even 13 degrees with lunar aspects in, the conjunction opposition in natal charts and also by transit. You'll have to feel it out, but know that the moon does move through things quickly, so it's quite supportive that way. There's one other thing I want to mention about the moon. You're going to hear this term, and it's called void of course. And what we can see about the void of course moon, what that means is that the moon has made its last aspect before it moves into the next sign. Void of course moon is important when you're timing events, when you want to launch a project. Also, if you're working with horary charts. In that case, the moon and the position of the moon is one of the most important, if not the most important aspect in the chart. All right, that's it for today. Go check out where the moon is, and we'll see you on the call. Bye.